Hey everybody, today we're going to talk about natural selection, and the two key concepts I want to focus on here are survival of the fittest and that there is always variation in populations, which is going to allow evolution to occur. So let's get going. Next. All right, so key concept number one, the most well-suited organisms in an environment will survive and reproduce. This is essentially the survival of the fittest part, and the things that are the fittest or the most likely to survive are the ones that have the best adaptations. Okay, and so the best adaptations make them survive the best. These are inheritable physical or behavioral traits. Okay, they are inheritable. That means that adaptations are genetic. Okay. If we look at this comic over here, we'll see that the beaver is hoping for a chainsaw, and even if he could make a chainsaw appear, that's not an adaptation. An adaptation is something that he already has in his traits because it's in his genes already. So yeah, at the bottom it says adaptation doesn't involve trying. Sometimes we hear the phrase like that animals are forced to adapt. Say like the environment changes and somebody says the animals are forced to adapt. That leaves us with the impression that the animals are trying, and that the animals, I'll say are trying, that they like think, hey, something's going on here, we better figure this out and do something about it. But that's not what happens at all. Okay. As you saw with the pocket mice, all this means here, forced to adapt, is that some of them are going to die, and the ones that are better suited to the environment are going to live. So actual adaptations that this guy might have are, let's say he has a thicker coat of fur, thicker or thinner coat of fur, or maybe he has like a narrower, wider tail, or bigger, stronger tail, or maybe his teeth grow at a faster or slower rate. Any of those things based on the environment could be an adaptation. It could make him better suited to surviving and reproducing better than others. But those are all things that would be already coded for in his genes. So no single individual can adapt. This guy can't think, I want to do this better in this way, and then he does. That's not an adaptation. That will not be passed on to his kids. So what I wrote here, forced to adapt, this is wrong, right? This is not correct. So here's some more examples. So white fur on polar bears, that would be genetic. That's something that could be passed on and will be beneficial. Cacti have waxy skin to prevent water loss. That's an adaptation. It's genetic. It's inheritable. Birds have hollow bones to reduce weight for flying. That's another one. Okay. So let's move on to the next one. When we talk about being best adapted, we say if an organism is fit. And so fitness is an organism's ability to successfully pass on its genes to its offspring, or in other words, its ability to successfully reproduce. And so it says it is not the same as physical fitness. This fitness does not mean, in evolutionary terms, does not mean like necessarily the one that has the best cardiovascular health, right? Who can run the fastest mile. Like sometimes it is the one who can run the fastest, but sometimes like the most fit is like the one with the best camouflage or something, or the one that has the best eyesight, right? Or the one that has the best armor. Okay, something like that. It does not necessarily mean the strongest one. Not every time. It can. Okay, so for example, in my great giraffe cartoon here, we have. It says, which is the most fit? Well, we have these short ones, and they are sad. You can see their tears because they live in an environment where there's only tall trees, this hypothetical environment. And so possibly what's going to happen here is that they don't live to reproductive age as often as the tall ones because they aren't getting as much nourishment. And so it's possible that some of them die off early before they reproduce. And over time, if we're going to answer this question, how will this population evolve? And we have to remember individuals don't evolve. So we have to look at how does the whole population evolve? Okay, so over time, what's probably going to happen is that if a lot of these guys die and don't pass on their genes, their short neck genes, then these guys are going to live longer and reproduce. And overall, over time, the population should get taller on average. So I want us to be able to graph this. So we did the beans lab where we saw and learned about bell curve. We learned about a bell curve. And so we know that we will label this axis height down here. Okay, maybe height in feet. We're talking about the giraffes, right? And over here is going to be number of giraffes. So essentially right here in the middle, this is our average. And so we have the most giraffes, because this is the number of giraffes. Say this is like all the way up to 100, maybe 50 or something, 25. 75. And so you have the most giraffes of this medium height. Okay. And so I'm going to make up some heights for giraffes. I think like 15 is short. I have no idea. And so average height of giraffe population with environment of tall trees. So that's the one we were just looking at. So that means we predicted that maybe some of these ones, okay, some of the giraffes here in this area of the curve are possibly not going to survive as long. And so that's going to shift our curve to the right a little bit, okay? And so overall, we might see that this average is going to shift. And so we can draw our new curve. Let's see if I can get a new color. Our new curve is going to be shifted over to the right a little bit. And our new average is going to be over here. So maybe, this one is now like 18 and a half feet. Maybe I'm just making up the numbers. Maybe it was, 17 and a half feet over here. And the average over time grew because the short ones were dying, not passing on their genes, and the long ones were. Okay, so the long ones were more fit. And that is how the population evolved, not an individual. No individual stretched out his neck really long and got a long neck and then passed that on to its offspring. That's not how it works. Okay, next thing. Key concept number 2, there must be variation in a population for evolution to occur. So if we have identical giraffes here, say they're all tall, in this tall environment, well, none of them have an advantage over any of the others. And so this means that if one of them dies and the others reproduce, they're just going to reproduce and get the same kind of tall offspring, and the population will not change. And so we actually don't see this happening at all in nature because there's always variation. So here it says variation is differences in physical traits in a population. Okay, so we've been talking about that, and we saw that with the bean. Even with the beans, there was variation in the size of the beans. All right, where does variation come from? So I just want to mention 2 things here for these 2 pictures. So one, it's right there. It says sexual reproduction. And we've talked about this before. With in genetics about how sexual reproduction is essentially just an endless combination of eggs and sperm coming together to be able to make unique individuals or unique offspring. And really all the different combinations of eggs and sperm that could come together give us endless combinations of offspring. So there's a lot of variation through sexual reproduction. And the second thing is going to be mutation. So over here, what we have is bacteria. Okay, and bacteria reproduce asexually. They are essentially clones of one another, right? They just divide, they copy their DNA, and then they divide. So they have to make 2 copies of DNA. They originally have 1. And in order to divide, they have to make 2 so that it can go to each of these. Each of these new cells. So let's say that one goes there, but then it also makes another, has to copy its DNA. So this copy goes over here, and I drew it blue because that means maybe there was a mutation. So maybe when it copied the DNA, there was a mutation, and now this mutated DNA goes to all of these guys. Okay, and so now all of these ones are going to have different DNA than the other side, than these guys. And so even though bacteria should hypothetically be identical, they're not going to be, because there are always mutations that occur in the copying of DNA that make them different. So this doesn't only happen in bacteria or asexually reproducing things. It also happens in any species, right? And any species can have mutations, and those mutations can lead to new traits, just like what we saw with the pocket mice, with the light mice having dark babies every generation because there were those random mutations. Okay, cool. Those are important key concepts there. All right, finally, I want you to answer these 2 questions. So you can pause it here, answer these at the end of your notes, and then, also, as always, let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.